Chapter 16. Brilliant, groundbreaking, a laugh a minute! So the members of the audience marveled to one another as they rushed to the lobby, for they all assumed it must be intermission. The best first act finale since Attila the Hun in iambic pentameter. Now, shall we purchase some snacks? Penelope's review, however, would have to wait. Alexander, Beowulf, Cassiopeia, where have you gone? Wait for me! Manners forgotten, she pushed and elbowed her way through the lobby doors and stood on Drury Lane, frantically calling, Children, where are you? By now the pirate actors, or actor-pirates if you prefer, had also emerged from the theater, still in character and still in pursuit of the Incorrigibles. Their cries of, Arr! And Scurvy brats! Rang all around her. Were they acting? Penelope couldn't tell. She was fearful for the children, but was also furious to the point of being in very high dudgeon indeed. Imagine 3 perfectly nice children and their governess attending the theater, which ought to be a cultural and educational experience of the highest order, and they get attacked by pirates instead, on dry land no less. She tugged on the tail end of the nearest pirate's bandana and fiercely scolded. Sir, this has gone far enough. It is obvious that you are trying to add some excitement to your premiere at the children's expense, and I find it simply unacceptable. I assure you I will be lodging a complaint with the management. Arr! The pirate yelled, ignoring Penelope completely. Thar they are! War? Penelope replied, without thinking. Pirate talk was rather contagious. Thar! He pointed his cutlass towards the street. Lama woo! It was the Incorrigibles. Say, Miss Lumley, over here! And Simon. Whoa there, don't just stand there, miss, unless you want to be run over by a bunch of sea knaves. Oh, I'm sorry, that was not the right voice. Whoa there, miss, don't just stand there unless you want to be run over by a bunch of sea knaves. Old Timothy? It was old Timothy. The Ashton's man was in Drury Lane, directly in front of the theater. Old Timothy driving a carriage, in fact. He was having a devil of a time keeping the horse from bolting, what with all the pirates swarming about. Penelope couldn't have been more surprised if Agatha Swansburn herself were holding the reins. Easy! The old coachman's neck muscles strained to whipcords as he held the horses back. Get in, miss. These ruffians, before they frighten the horses half to death. Whoa, easy. The carriage door opened. In a flash, Simon's hand reached out to help Penelope up. The moment she was inside, Simon called out, All aboard! Time to set sail! Quick! Aye! Old Timothy turned and cracked his whip over the heads of the pirates to scatter the crowd. Crack! Then again over the horses. Crack! They reared and hit the ground at full gallop. The carriage heaved into motion, and a bouncy, bumpy, bone-shaking ride it was. The traffic around the theater was dense, but old Timothy drove the horses through it like a man possessed. The Incorrigibles whooped and hollered as if they'd never had so much fun in their lives. Still reeling from the shock of it all, Penelope looked around the carriage. There were Simon and all 3 Incorrigibles sitting next to a heap of rags. Between whoops, the children nibbled on flat, circular cakes. Their happy faces were covered in crumbs. Snacks hooray! Cassiopeia announced, showing Penelope the half-eaten cake. Before anyone could explain, the pile of rags spoke. Nice babies, feed babies. From the midst of the pile, a wide, semi-toothless grin emerged, and the old woman revealed herself from within the camouflage of her own shawls. The carriage lurched and swerved. Simon held onto his hat and said, Miss Lumley, allow me to present Madame Ionesco, fortune-teller extraordinaire, although I think you've met before. How, bump, do you do? Penelope said, astonished. I'm pleased to be properly introduced to you, madame, though I must say this is rather unexpected. It is unexpected for me, too, the fortune-teller confided. And I see the future, so unexpected things are very rare. Madame Ionesco was kind enough to agree to join us after the show, for a modest fee, of course, Simon explained. We'd just concluded our negotiations when we saw the children running out, and those ridiculous pirates, and then the Ashton's driver appeared and offered to drive us all to safety. I knew the wolf babies be at the pirate show, the old woman bragged. I saw it here. She closed her eyes and gestured in the air, indicating the realm of the mysterioso. "Thank-a-woo for yum-yum cakes," Beowulf said, taking another. "You're welcome, honey." Madame Ionesco seemed far better prepared for this adventure than Penelope was. Clearly, fortune-telling had its advantages. "Hey!" It was old Timothy, yelling over the clatter of galloping hooves. "Before you serve tea and crumpets, would you mind telling me where we're going?" For indeed, the pirates were still chasing them. Some were on horseback, some on foot, and some, could it be, were riding velocipedes. "Arr!" the pirates yelled, waving their swords. "Ahoy! Ka-ka!" The parrot had finally gotten loose from its tether and was now serving as navigator, flying after the carriage and then swooping back towards the pursuing pirates to show them which way to go. Penelope spoke urgently to Simon. "If my understanding of theatrical custom is correct, the interval will soon be over, and the actors will have to return to the theater to perform the second act. We simply must hide until then." "How about my garret? It's a bit downtrodden, to be sure, but we'll be off the beaten path." Penelope frowned. "Off the beaten path is not good enough. We need some place truly obscure." "Little traffic," Madame Ionesco suggested. "More cakes, wolf babies." Little trafficked. Could that truly be what she'd said? But no matter. Now Penelope knew exactly what to do. She laid a hand on her purse and felt the familiar outline of the Hicksby's guide within. "Take us to the British Museum," she ordered the coachman. "And hurry." "Museum!" The children were overjoyed. First the theater, now a trip to the British Museum. Surely this had been the most educational day in London yet. Old Timothy's cries of "ep, ep," and "yeah" kept the horses at full tilt. The carriage bounced and rattled along the stony streets, at times so violently it seemed as if the wheels would shatter. At this pace, Penelope knew she had only moments to ask the fortune-teller all the questions that had been wheeling through her mind. She spoke quickly and low, so the children wouldn't hear. "Madame Ionesco, on the day we first met, you said something to the children. The hunt is on. Can you tell me what that means?" "Shh." The woman closed her eyes and made a series of strange gestures with her hands. "There is a curse on the wolf babies and on their kin," she intoned. "Terrible curse made long before they were born." "A curse? Madame Ionesco, that's absurd," Simon interjected. The fortune-teller shrugged. "The hunt is on. See for yourself." Penelope craned her neck out the window. That there were throngs of rampaging actor-pirates pursuing their carriage was thoroughly absurd, and yet it seemed thoroughly dangerous, too. The costumes were silly and accents ridiculous, but the swords were ever so sharp. She turned back to the old woman. "Madame, I have been told that you are a true soothsayer from beyond, a seer, a person who can glimpse beyond the mist." "Thank you, honey." Madame Ionesco flashed her semi-toothless grin. "I do my best." "With all your powers, then, can you remove this curse?" Madame Ionesco looked nervous. "If curse had been made by a human person, maybe. But it was not." Penelope felt goosebumps prickle on the back of her neck. Not human? Then what were they cursed by? In answer, Madame Ionesco threw back her head and howled. "Oh!" Beowulf and Cassiopeia joined in merrily. "Oh! Oh!" "Museum!" Alexander announced. "Arriving now!" The horses whinnied as the carriage rocked to a halt. Penelope tried to thank old Timothy for his timely rescue, but the old coachman simply tugged his cap and grumbled, "At your service, miss. Yours and the children," which struck Penelope as a meaningful, yet enigmatic sort of response. But any further conversation with old Timothy would have to wait, for as soon as his passengers were out of the carriage, he leapt back into his seat, grabbed the reins and the whip, and drove off at once. He was going back to Drury Lane Theatre, for there was no telling what had become of Lady Constance in all this chaos, and she was, after all, his employer. With their rescuer gone, Penelope, Simon, and Madame Ionesco, and the children, were left standing at the entrance of the British Museum. "Parthenon," said Alexander, admiring the building's design. "Nice pediment," Beowulf observed. "Big, big, big," said Cassiopeia, counting the rows of massive fluted columns that lined the colonnade. All three children were quite correct, for the British Museum had recently been given a new entrance that looked like something out of ancient Greece. It would have been a perfect opportunity for a lesson on the relationship between neoclassical and Greek revival styles of architecture. Alas, there was no time. They had eluded the rampaging pirates for the moment, but the theatrically inclined parrot still swooped overhead. With a mocking, "Caw, caw, ahoy!" it darted back the way it came. "That parrot will lead our pursuers here within minutes. We must find Gallery 17 at once," Penelope said, as she retrieved the Hicksby's guide from her purse. Simon gazed at the imposing pillars of stone. "Say, Miss Lumley, I hate to mention it, but as it's a bit late in the evening, the museum's closed." "Have no fear. On the subject of Gallery 17, Mr. Hicksby's instructions are quite thorough." She found the page and read, "After hours, use the hidden entrance." "What hidden entrance?" Cassiopeia asked Alexander, who was already fiddling with his compass. "I don't know, Wolf is hidden." "Thar! Har! Ahoy!" The sound of their pursuers was faint in the distance, but growing closer. "May I?" Simon took the Hicksby's guide and unfolded the map. "If only I had my sextant. What do you think, Alexander?" While Simon and the children examined the map, Penelope turned to Madame Ionesco. "I'm afraid those sword-wielding thespians will be here any moment. Can you create some sort of a diversion? It may buy us the time we need to escape." The fortune-teller chuckled. "I'm queen of diversion. You watch." Simon and Alexander were clearly getting nowhere. They turned the map round and round as if they were trying to find the top end of a triangle. "This map is highly detailed, but the hidden entrance does not appear to be on it," Simon said in frustration. "I told you it's hidden," Alexander explained with a shrug. Suddenly, Beowulf let out a sharp bark to get everyone's attention. "Beowulf idea," he exclaimed. "Follow smell of paintings." Penelope and Simon exchanged a look. Beowulf was clearly being up to much stick, and yet, "It's an absurd plan, but I have no better one," Simon said. "It's worth a try, at least," Penelope agreed. "Children, if you please, sniff." The Incorrigibles sniffed. They closed their eyes and sniffed again. One after another, they caught the scent. "Oil paints," Cassiopeia pointed. "Turpentine," Alexander pointed the same way. "Ominous landscapes there," Beowulf cried. All three children bolted around the side of the museum. "I make distractions. No worries, save babies," Madame Ionesco yelled after them. But there was no time to look back, for Penelope and Simon were already chasing after the Incorrigibles. Sniffing and running and then sniffing some more, they made it all the way round the back of the museum before finding the source of those distinctly artistic aromas. A rather ordinary-looking door tucked behind a hedge. Close inspection revealed that the door was marked with the faded numerals 1 and 7. "This must be the hidden entrance to Gallery 17. Well done, children." Penelope made a mental note to positively spoil the children with treats when they got home, as a reward for being so clever. Simon pulled on the door mightily, which was stuck in the wall of in the way of a door that was rarely, if ever, used. Beowulf helpfully lubricated the hinges with a bit of drool, and after a heave-ho from Simon and a final twist to the knob, the door creaked open. Simon peered inside. "Bit dark in there. Better check the Hicksby's for what to do next. I'll sneak behind the shrubbery and see how the diversion's working." With a quiet tread born of crossing silently backstage during performances, Simon slipped behind the hedge. Penelope reached for her purse and nearly panicked. "Who has the Hicksby's guide?" "You have, Lemawoo." "No, I am quite certain I gave it to Alexander." "I have compass only. Ask Beowulf." "Beowulf, check your pockets, please." "Pockets has cake, charcoal pencil, tuppence, notebook." All eyes turned to Cassiopeia, who shrugged. "Sorry, no Hicksby's." Penelope did a quick inhale-exhale to steady herself. "It must have been dropped in the excitement. Never mind. We found the door to Gallery 17 by following the smell of paintings. But inside the museum it will smell like paintings everywhere. We shall have to devise another way to navigate. Plan B, as it were. Eek!" But the rustle and crunch of breaking twigs was caused by Simon. He emerged from the hedge, grinning from ear to ear. Pirates found us, but Madame Ionesco has thrown them completely off course. She's holding a seance right there in the museum steps, and promised to raise the spirits of Richard Burbage, the greatest tragic actor of Shakespeare's day. Acting lessons from beyond the grave. They're all hooked. Speaking as a bard myself, I wouldn't mind hearing what Burbage has to say. Penelope glanced at the sky. The parrot circled high above. I'm afraid there's no time for that. Quick, children, inside. The Incorrigibles, obediently and fearlessly, disappeared into the blackness. Simon hesitated. Awfully dark in there. What does the Hicksbys say? I wish I knew, Penelope replied, as she lifted her skirts and stepped in after the children. Simon, who was not only a perfectly nice young man, but a brave and loyal one too, shrugged and followed, and shut the door behind him. One might assume that any entrance, even a hidden one, to a place as splendid as the British Museum would have to be at least a little bit grand. But Penelope, Simon, and the children found themselves in a pitch-dark tunnel that seemed more likely a way to a dungeon. It was narrow, damp, and silent, except for the occasional plink-plunk of water dripping. The ceiling was so low they had to crawl on all fours. Even so, Penelope couldn't help bumping her head now and again. She struggled to think of what advice Agatha Swansburn might have for their current predicament. As far as she knew, the wise old founder had never had to flee actors dressed as pirates by crawling through a dank, dark tunnel into the British Museum after hours. But if she had, Penelope thought, no doubt she would have done it bravely and without any grumbling. So, be brave, children, she said aloud. I know it's dark, but we shall reach the end soon, I'm sure of it. Of course, the Incorrigibles were not at all afraid of the dark, and were perfectly used to crawling on all fours. In fact, they were having a fine old time worming their way through the tunnel. It was their anxious governess whom Penelope was really telling to be brave. For you see, people of particular pluck are no different than the rest of us. At times they feel afraid, or lonely, or hopeless, just as the less plucky do. They simply happen to excel at keeping their spirits up in a pickle. As Agatha Swansburn said, no panicking, no complaining, no quitting. 6 words to the wise that are well worth learning and following. Simon must have felt a similar need to buck himself up. Almost there, Miss Lumley, he called encouragingly from somewhere behind. Penelope appreciated the sentiment, of course, but the remark made her rather glad it was too dark to see, for the rear view of her crawling along on hands and knees would have been ungraceful, to say the least. Thank you, Mr. Harley Dickinson. Oh, Mr. Harley Dickinson. What? Given the perilous circumstances, I think you might call me Penelope if you like. Righto. Well, call me Simon, then. She was just as glad he couldn't see her blush and smile. If you have ever had the misfortune of being stuck crawling through a pitch-dark tunnel without the option of turning back, with no idea if and when the nerve-wracking experience might come to an end, you already know that even 5 minutes of such an exercise is bound to feel like a very long time indeed. Penelope, Simon, and the Incorrigibles crawled heroically along for nearly twice that long, and one can only imagine what an eternity it seemed to them. But there is an old saying, not one of Agatha Swanburn's, as it turns out, although she would have found it perfectly sensible, that insists that most tunnels do eventually have a light at the end of them, even if that end is far, far away. This particular tunnel did not contradict the notion, for eventually the 5 explorers emerged into what seemed to be a dense, velvety, soft thicket. They were still in the dark, but at least they could stand up. And when they pushed through the thicket, which soon revealed itself to be a tangle of heavy velvet drapes, there was not only light, but art. Beowulf sniffed deeply. Oil paints, he said with satisfaction. On every wall hung historical portraits so shameless in their overuse of symbolism that any first-year art student could have deduced what they were. Penelope had taken 3 semesters of art appreciation at Swansburn Academy, so she had no doubts whatsoever. Gallery 17, Overuse of Symbolism in Minor Historical Portraits, she announced, stomping the muck from her damp shoes. We have arrived. Truly, it looked as if no one had ever set foot in this gallery before. A layer of dust filmed the floor, and cobwebs drifted in every corner. There seemed to be no way in or out of the gallery other than that horrible tunnel. But someone, at some point, had hung up all these frankly uninspired paintings. Why bother if no one was ever going to see them? They moved from portrait to portrait. At each one, Simon read aloud the accompanying plaque. The Chief General of Bavaria, he said. The Regent of Liechtenstein. The Wazir of Constantinople. even though a coat of grime and the slapdash quality of the paintings was evident, with their stiff, awkwardly posed figures and dizzying parade of symbols. One could scarcely see past all the crowns, roses, shamrocks, halos, piles of gold, angels' wings, laurel's leaves, roaring lions. The list went on and on. "The goddess Diana," Simon read, as they gathered in front of the last and strangest painting. "Athens and Sparta?" guessed Alexander. "In a way, the Greeks call her Artemis, but the Romans call her Diana. See the bow and arrow in the forest in the background? Crescent moon in the sky, litter of wolf cubs at her feet? It's Diana, all right," Simon explained. "Goddess of the hunt, of the forest, and the moon. Protector of children, too." "Look," exclaimed Beowulf. "Ominous." "I know it's gloomy, but don't be frightened," said Simon comfortingly. "It's only a painting, after all." "No, ominous landscape. In attic. Same ominous." Beowulf sounded completely sure of himself, for he did have a keen eye for art. Penelope looked at the canvas, the colors, the brush strokes, the composition. A shiver of recognition ran down her spine. Except for the presence of Diana in the place of the bloody-fanged wolf, this painting was remarkably similar to the one at Ashton Place. "Beowulf is right," she said. "This is by the same artist who painted a rather disturbing mural in the attic of Ashton Place." "Ah!" Cassiopeia moaned. Penelope laid a soothing hand on her head. "I know it's an important discovery, but this is no time for howling, dear." "Ah! Cursive, look," the girl said, pointing at the lower right corner of the canvas, where artists often sign their work. Barely visible beneath the dust was the letter A in an ornate script. "Say, that's a funny coincidence. The ticket envelope my acquaintance at the Drury Lane gave me, the one that had our tickets to the premiere, it had that same sort of fancy A marked on it." Penelope only half heard Simon's musings, for her gaze was drawn back to the face of Diana. "I've seen that woman before, but where?" she murmured. Beowulf firmly shook his head. "Ominous landscape, mythic lady, wrong gallery," he concluded. He would have been right, too, if the goddess Diana had simply been plopped into the middle of an ominous landscape. Then the painting would have belonged in Gallery 11, use of mythic figures in ominous landscapes. Yet this painting was, in fact, a portrait, which is to say a picture of a real person and not a made-up one. The realization struck Penelope with the strength of an epiphany. True, this Diana looked quite a bit younger, but Penelope had gazed so many times at the image that hung in Miss Mortimer's study at school, she knew there could be no mistake. It was Agatha Swanburne. There she was, the pretty, no-nonsense features, the impish yet wise expression in those wide, sea-green eyes, the smooth, distinctively auburn-colored hair. Penelope gasped. "What is it, Lamawoo?" Cassiopeia was at her side in an instant. "See ghost?" asked Beowulf. "Burbage, maybe?" added Alexander hopefully. Truth be told, he had rather enjoyed his brief moment of speaking on the professional stage. No, not a ghost," Penelope said after a moment. But the skin on the back of her neck prickled, and her arms were covered with goosebumps. For receiving a message of a sort from a person who is long dead, why, if that didn't count as seeing a ghost, then what did?